It can be really lonely and hard inside your own head, right, in your own body. And no one really gives you a manual for that. And this is an attempt to say, hey, just because you might be single, or maybe if you're married and you're feeling lonely, doesn't mean you can't, invest in yourself and retain your own personhood. And I hope that people feel a little bit more ease about how to navigate that relationship with themselves.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
I am a happily married guy for almost 25 years. So at first blush, I don't seem like the target market for the new book by Meghan Keane. It's called Party of One, Be Your Own Best Life Partner. And, I have a life partner, plus 2 kids, a couple of dogs, and some seasonal allergies that have been my life partner since well before my wife, kids, and dogs entered the picture. But there are some evenings or weekend afternoons or business trips or just idle time when it's just me and my thoughts and, the dogs. Times when, over the years, I've started not just feeling comfortable with my own company, but appreciative of it. It's a mind shift that Meghan Keane thinks is especially important for people who might feel stuck in a loop of seeking a romantic life partner at the expense of fully living life in the meantime. Keane is the creator and supervising editor of NPR's Life Kit podcast and radio show, and took the project on from both a personal angle and as a journalist. I am delighted that Meghan Keane joins us from NPR in Washington. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So it was really interesting and thought-provoking to read this book as a long-time and generally speaking, pretty comfortably married person. And I think that's partly because even as a married person, there are large parts of my own life, at least, in which it's taken years to feel good about being solo, happy in my own company. What was the turning point for you that led you to start exploring this?
Well, Mitch, I have to say my secret hope is that married people also read this book because, it's so important to maintain that relationship with yourself, even in partnership. For me, the turning point was coming out of a handful of breakups, of very quick relationships where I just put so much of my self-worth into those relationships. And it felt like a very fragile, delicate situation that I didn't want to disrupt. And as a result, those relationships ended because I never was my full self. I never asked hard questions about, do our values actually match up? Are we actually compatible? And it felt really bad. Once I got out of those relationships, it felt like singleness was some kind of exile, which I knew it wasn't, but it still felt that way. And I was thinking to myself, how do I feel better about this? I know that being single is valid and amazing. And, at one point of our lives, everyone's going to be single at some point. So I better get used to this. And I thought, okay, well, I'm a journalist. Let's get to journalism here and look into some resources about how I could be comfortable no matter what my relationship status.
To read this book is to start recognizing that the deck in many ways is stacked against people who are not in traditional relationships. How do you see our society rewarding marriage and long-term committed relationships at the expense of people who aren't in them?
Oh, in so many ways. I mean, in the book, I talk about this term that was coined by researcher Bella DiPaolo. It's called singleism, right? It's any kind of discrimination or marginalization against single people. And so we see it on a very high institutional level. We see it right in our tax code about favoring married couples. We see it in healthcare. We see it in housing. But we also see it socially, right? We see it in work where a single person might be expected to work late or a special shift on a weekend just because they don't have kids or a partner. And when you think about it and you kind of boil it down to, well, why is that treatment being had just because someone doesn't have a romantic partner in their life? It doesn't make much sense when you just kind of lay out the bare facts. And it is deeply unfair because, like I said, everyone will be single at least one point in their lives, even if it's for just a handful of weeks or many, many years and decades, right? So to me, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to put that extra shame on single people just because they decide to have a different kind of, life structure, or because it's just not in the cards for them at that moment.
This book, though, is not necessarily an argument against marriage or even relationships. So what would you hope the ideal result might be from someone who reads this book?
I would love for anyone reading this book to remind themselves that the relationship with themselves is always going to be important. And it's wonderful to bring people into your life. I have a whole chapter about friendship and why that's so important. But we still need to understand how to be in relationship with our own emotions, our thoughts, our feelings, how to regulate. Those are just invaluable skills that it feels like we never really fully get taught. And it kind of mystifies me why we don't. And I'm not saying we have to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We have to do everything by ourselves. But I do think it can be really lonely and hard inside your own head, right? In your own body. And no one really gives you a manual for that. And this is an attempt to say, hey, just because you might be single, or maybe if you're married and you're feeling lonely, doesn't mean you can't, invest in yourself and retain your own personhood. And I hope that people feel a little bit more ease about how to navigate that relationship with themselves.
There is one point where you zero in on what sounds like it might be the biggest challenge for at least some of your readers, existing in that space between wanting a partner but knowing that you don't need one. What's your advice to people who find themselves there and find it difficult to manage those emotions in that space? Yeah,
I've definitely felt that myself. And what I found helpful was basically practicing acceptance, right? It didn't mean I had to be okay with the situation necessarily, or, I wasn't allowed to not be frustrated either. But a tool that I started to learn about was this idea of radical acceptance, which comes from dialectical behavior therapy. And basically, it's a tool to help you kind of stop that resistance, because that's the thing that causes the extra frustration, right? Like, I don't have a partner. I want one. I don't have one. God, I'm so frustrated. Radical acceptance is saying, okay, notice that you're resisting. Get really curious about it. It's kind of a mindful technique. How does it feel to resist? What does it feel like in my body? And just reminding yourself, things are exactly how they are right now. That doesn't mean you have to like it or you have to accept something that is, harmful in your life or bad, but it's just a way to calm down, get in touch with yourself, put the resistance aside for a second, and then move forward and make a choice. And then in that moment, the idea is that, okay, I'm accepting how things are right now. So maybe I can go do something that feels good, right? I can reach out to a friend. I can start, get back to a hobby. So it can take down that pressure in your own head of, God, I feel bad. I don't have this thing. It feels bad, and takes you off of that loop, at least temporarily.
Well, and a lot of it seems to be about not just mindfulness and staying in the current moment, but also imagining yourself down the road in a situation where you have come to accept your singleness over the years.
Oh, yeah, completely. And so a big part of my book is thinking about imagining what that life could look like. So many single people start to wait to do things, right? I certainly waited to do some travel for too long because I was like, well, I can't travel unless I have the partner and we can, split expenses and things like that. Or I can't get a dog because I need a partner to help me with the dog walks and things like that. And I started to say to myself, why am I waiting? I need to just start doing these things now. And that was really helpful for the acceptance part of it for me. I wasn't waiting to, buy property to get my first home. I got a dog. Her name's Margot. She's gorgeous. She's a cute little dachshund. And I love the love that she gives me in my life. And I started traveling. I took myself on road trips. And so I starting to accept a life that, you say like one day maybe I'll be okay with this. But I encourage people to say, okay, imagine what you really want your life to look like. And even if that includes a partner, take them out of the equation. Try to start living that now.
Do you think the isolation of COVID jump-started this effort in people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it did for me. It was like a big wake-up call of, gosh, like life is very fleeting. And I was thinking to myself, well, dating feels really extra hard, especially in the midst of 2020, right? And so I was thinking, well, I can't wait to do any of these things, right? And so I think a lot of people are also waking up to the idea that friendships also offer a lot of beautiful love and intimacy in their life. And with the frustrations of modern dating, it's kind of an easy trade-off to think, well, maybe if I date a little less but spend time with more friends, that'll be a better use of my time, and I'll still get a lot of love in my life. So yeah, I do think the pandemic kind of woke people up to think, okay, what are my priorities? How do I want to actually spend my time?
Do you feel like a happier person for having gone through the research and the interviews and the writing of this book itself?
Yeah, happier. Yes, I feel happier. Maybe there's a question mark in my voice. I think I do feel happier. I feel the phrasing I always come back to is I feel more at ease. I feel like there is. I have more tools in my toolbox now. One of the experts in my book, a therapist, told me that emotional regulation is not about being in an eternal state of Zen. It's about maintaining choice. And so that means even if you're having a big emotion like anger or anxiety, it doesn't mean not feeling those emotions. It means understanding them, have the self-awareness about how to process those feelings, and then having the ability to recognize the choice that you can give yourself to then move on to something more nourishing. And that's how I feel about a lot of the tools in this book. I feel like, knowledge is power, right? And so I'm really grateful for all the experts that I talked to that gave me these really affirming tools that are really accessible. And so, yeah, I think that does lead to a little bit more happiness.
Well, Meghan Keane, I wish you all the happiness or all the at-easeness in the world.
Thank you, Mitch. Yeah.
Congratulations on the book, and I hope we'll talk again.
Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Meghan Keane is the founder and supervising editor of NPR's Life Kit podcast and radio show, and author of the book Party of One, Be Your Own Best Life Partner, which also includes illustrations by NPR's L.A. Johnson. Before I throw it over to our own podcast and radio star, Ethan Shanty, for the closing credits, I want to take just a moment to remind some of you, and let others of you know for the first time, that Northwards is a listener-supported enterprise, part of a much larger listener-supported organization, North Country Public Radio. We produce other podcasts, public events, a website, an app, smart speaker skills, and a public radio station that broadcasts unmatched regional news and information, plus national news, music, entertainment, and more, 24/7, 365. And contributions from listeners just like you represent the vast majority of our budget every year. Please take this opportunity to make your contribution now at ncpr.org/give. When you donate $10 or more per month, you can get your very own Northwards snapback trucker hat with our very spiffy logo, or choose any number of other thank you gifts. Support the interviews and the other stuff you love about NCPR right now with a contribution at ncpr.org/give. Thanks so much for listening and for making this show possible. But we don't just depend on you. We rely on a whole team of people to produce this show and everything else we do. Ethan Shanty, who are those people?
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, edited, and produced by Mitch Tyke, with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media, Bill Hanel is our digital director, and Doyle Dean is our production manager. Music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To support this show and find more podcasts, visit ncpr.org. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.